Hello, and welcome to another episode of Story Crafting. In a moment, I will show you something I've been working on. You can tell me what you think in the comments. I'm watching you.
Let's approach this a teensy bit differently. So, today we are talking about analog horror, something that has been taking this whole platform over, I'd say, for the past few years now. And it's definitely made its way into the mainstream with movies like Skinamarink. So I thought, why not talk about analog horror a bit more, especially with spooky season among us, October right around the corner. And I'm just gonna talk. I'm just going to ramble and edit down whatever I have, because that's how we do things here. So, like the Urban Legends video, let's talk analog horror. Hey there, quick interruption from the main video. This is future me. Have no fear, but just need to switch things up a teensy bit here, because the original not sponsor bit where I'm sponsoring myself needs to be completely redone. So here I am. I am still my own sponsor. Links to everything are in the description below. But I would like to say that my book Dark Pine Tales of Terror, a collection of 6 scary stories, is officially available to order. Yes, you can now purchase this. This lovely thing can be yours. You can get it on Amazon, you can order it from Barnes & Noble, you can order it from Books A Million, and if you don't like those options and would prefer more thrifty or independent options, you can also find it on, I think it was Thrift Books, and I should have had this pulled up beforehand, but I don't. So hang on, I've got this. I have completely got this, don't worry. Better World Books. You can find it on Better World Books as well, and they also donate books for every book purchased, so I think that's a cool thing. Not sponsored, like not actually sponsored by them. I am still very much my own sponsor, hence the reason I am making this. But you can get it from there. Also, on a different note, I do also have my shop, which is linked below, where there is well, as of recording this, there is a discount code going on that is available until the end of October. You can get 31% off because it's Halloween, spooky season. If I remember correctly, the code is spooky. So you can get discounts on your orders from there. And I do have my Buy Me a Coffee and my Patreon. Again, everything is linked below. On my Buy Me a Coffee, you can get the bi-monthly zine, which is my newsletter, where sometimes, like the current issue that is up, you can get a printable poster with it. So yeah, check that out as well. And I will let you continue on with the video this way. On with the video. So now that that's out of the way, let's talk about analog horror. What exactly is it? If anything, I would compare it to the found footage genre of the early 90s. I would definitely say it has a very Blair Witch vibe to it, because a lot of it very much is based around found footage, found audio, with things like the Mandela Catalog, or a lot of the other mascot horror themed ones that have a lot of literal found footage that is created specifically for it to tell the story through found VHS tapes. There's series that involve found like security footage. So again, even in things with like Amanda the Adventurer, that in a sense is very analog horror in the sense that you are dealing with a series of lost tapes, which again, found footage when you really think about it. But then also has spliced in actual found footage the more you interact with the games and start inputting different answers and choices. Analog horror is very much an extension of the found footage genre from, I'd say, early to mid 90s to the early 2000s, because it does very much have that sort of similar vibe to it where you are telling a story through this footage, but nowadays there's also more of an interactive property to it. You see people making games out of it. You see people turning it into an actual ARG, the alternate reality game, where you can actively interact with and help progress the story. Analog horror is essentially taking found footage horror to this new level. It's expanding on it and adding to it. Now, what exactly makes analog horror analog horror? I'd say it's, I mean, along with the common theme of it being found footage and just found audio, things like that, there's also just an emphasis on, I'd say, certain topics, certain themes. And it's usually either running with the mascot theme, sort of dipping into mascot horror, or I want to say like a secret invasion kind of thing, where it's usually, say, some sort of parasite, alien, or even just digging into like liminal spaces with things like the back rooms. It's sort of playing on a darker side of something that we occasionally think about, like with liminal spaces. It's sort of expanding on the idea of just these empty buildings, these empty areas that I hate to say we're seeing more and more of nowadays, but we are seeing more and more of nowadays with places like malls shutting down and things like that. Or just like abandoned playgrounds, abandoned towns, abandoned buildings in general. Sort of that urban exploration. But then also digging into the mascot horror side of things. You can have things like abandoned amusement parks, abandoned TV, like television sets and lots, and just digging into that. Or like with, in a sense, Five Nights at Freddy's, it always comes back to Five Nights at Freddy's. Not intentionally, but whenever we dip into the conversation of mascot horror, it's going to come up. But even that, to an extent, you are dealing with an abandoned area that has a darker history. It is twisting something you don't usually think that much about, but you do interact with a lot. But then there's also the fear of the unknown with creatures, invasion, or aliens, like actual, like from space aliens. It's dealing with that, and the thought of what if they've been here all along and then we're just discovering that. What if things we know aren't what they seem? And a lot of it, especially with the aliens and like the thought of imposters, the thoughts of people not being who they are. It's sort of like an invasion of the body snatchers kind of deal. It's very much all coming down to this thought of what if this thing I'm used to is not what it is? What if what I've been interacting with this whole time or have interacted with in the past isn't what it seems? But then add in a sprinkle of fear of the unknown with a lot of what ifs, and then you get this sort of cacophony of analog horror. But then what makes analog horror analog, because you can't have the analog horror without the analog half of it, while the other points were very much the story aspect of it, what makes it analog is literally the found footage half of it. It's literally the source. So it's the VHS tapes, it's the cassette tapes, it's finding old recordings, it's finding books, old websites, things like that. It's the old technology of it. That's the factor of analog horror that adds the analog factor to it. So I think that's very interesting, seeing that it's making a big comeback, because when you really think about it, if anything, going back to Blair Witch, that truly was one of the first big found footage movies, but if that were made nowadays, if you showed someone Blair Witch now and didn't tell them it was made when it was, if you just uploaded that in separate chunks, treated it like someone posting to a channel, being like, hey, I found this footage, you could say, in a sense, Blair Witch is very much sort of an inspiration for analog horror as it is now, because you could have something like that nowadays. And I mean, in a sense, you sort of also saw it back in the days of creepypastas in the 20-teens with things like Marbled Hornets, the Marbled Hornets, the Slender series. Yeah, Slenderman. I am talking about Slenderman. The Marbled Hornets, that whole series, could technically really be considered analog horror before it really became a big thing on YouTube. But I think it's very interesting that we're suddenly seeing an uptick in this genre in a sense. because it very much is a subgenre. It's an extension of found footage, which was a subgenre of horror in itself. But I'm very curious to figure out why this is a thing. Well, not like why the analog horror genre is a thing in general, but more of why is it becoming more of a thing now? Why are we suddenly seeing things like Skinamarink, a big, a big movie that was in theaters? Why are we seeing that become as big as it is? Why are we seeing this sudden interest in analog horror? Because it seems like every year, every month, there's sort of a new series coming through and being created. And I feel like in a weird way it's tied to the trends in a sense, like general media trends. Because in these past few years, we've seen sort of a resurgence of an interest in old technology. And I hate to say, even as a millennial, I recognize it. I see it coming in. I see the resurgence of a lot of the technology I grew up in. I acknowledge that it is considered retro and outdated, because it is. You don't see people walking around with the giant clunky laptops of the early 2000s. You don't see people walking around with the separate modems with the handles on them anymore for LAN parties. I mean, you might. I'm not really in a LAN party crew, so I wouldn't know. But you've seen sort of a resurgence of interest in old technology, and I feel like with that, there's an interest in an aesthetic. And through that aesthetic, you get this creation of other things like analog horror. It's an interest in analog. It's an interest in analog technology, typewriters, old camcorders, old digital cameras. Heck, even just disposable film cameras, which have still been made and have been made throughout the years. There just hasn't been an interest in it up until recently. You're seeing more of an interest in just cassette tapes, and it's fascinating. Like I feel like analog horror becoming as big as it is now definitely corresponds to that. Because I feel like without that interest and that, I guess, new access to old technology and new interest in old technology, and it becoming more accessible to people again, because like any technology, when it becomes obsolete and not useful anymore, it becomes obsolete for a while and is just usually still sold in like a random side aisle in like Target or something until it becomes trendy again, and then suddenly there's vinyl everywhere. There's cassettes, there's VHS. There's a new interest again, and then you start seeing it being sold to the masses and it becomes more accessible to people again. I feel like because of that new accessibility to this old technology, that's been dipping more into this. And again, because it's trendy, you now have the aesthetic of it. You now have people being like, oh, I want this to look like this. I want this to look like an old tape, like an old VHS. And through that, people are realizing what they can create with that. And I feel like through that, thus analog horror was created. And just like the Urban Legends video, let's talk about the importance of analog horror as a genre, because it's important to talk about any genre in general, and its importance in different mediums, different media, because while it is very much a YouTube-centric genre, it has made it to the big screen. It has started working its way into other mediums. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more, I'd say, things like books coming out. Because, I mean, when I was in high school, there were definitely some books attempting that. And, I mean, in a sense, you do sort of see books kind of attempting things like that nowadays, with things like Cain's Jawbone, which is a whole book where the main goal is literally to take it apart and try to figure out the correct order. But I feel like you're gonna see more of a transition of analog horror into other mediums, which is why we need to discuss the importance of this. And I feel like the importance of analog horror is sort of to put an emphasis on the necessity of analog technology and just the importance of keeping certain things around, because without VHS, without cassette, without what was originally digital photos and digital videos, because digital cameras of the early 2000s were nothing like what you could film on one of these, or even just webcams of the early 2000s. It sort of brings an emphasis to keep that technology around, because you can create more with it. You can make more with it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we started finding more ways to use things like old cameras, old typewriters, for crying out loud. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we started seeing books that literally had photos of pages typed up from typewriters to create this whole 2D analog horror, in a sense, where you see stories being created from found pages and photos and just a mishmash of things. It very much is that importance of reminding us of how far we've come technology-wise, but also just how much we still need that technology and how we can still use it even nowadays. And then the importance of it in the horror aspect of it is just another way of really just testing the waters, expanding what we can do with the medium and with the genre of horror, because you can take it so many different ways. You can take analog any sort of direction in horror, because as I even described earlier, you can go the mascot horror route, you can go liminal spaces, aliens, news stations, because there are some really good ones about like broadcasts that never existed, but are treated like these things that once did, because it's that alternate reality of it. It's taking what we can use and find and what we've had to create this new thing, to expand on a genre that people think, it's like at this point, it's like people expect a genre to be one thing. When you think horror, you typically immediately think jump scares, you think fake out jump scares, you think, oh yeah, ghosts, monsters, killers, you think all of that. You think what you typically see in like the movie theaters. But analog horror is another genre of horror that really lets you expand on that and create something new from it. And I think that's definitely a big importance and a big thing we need to focus on in general in any medium, whether it be video or book or even just music. Heck, I mean, look at Night Vale. That expanded on podcasts. That created a whole just world of its own through a podcast and radio DJ setup. You can tell stories any way you want. You could do a whole audio series in analog, just being like, oh yeah, we found recordings from an old radio station, or these are tapes from an old band that we found in the attic somewhere, or in a basement. We bought it at a garage sale or something, or from antiquing. It allows you to really sort of push the limits and discover what else you can do. And I feel like any genre or anything that can cause someone to want to explore something further when it comes to storytelling, it's always good to see that becoming bigger. So if you made it this far into the video, I very much appreciate you. You rule. But you know the typical YouTuber shtick. This is the send out. This is the end of the video. Tell me what you guys thought in the comments. What are your thoughts on analog horror and where it has been going and where you think it could go? What some of the possibilities are? What other genres would you like me to talk about? And if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe. Don't forget, I have links to every way you can support me in the description below, and I will see you guys in the next video, whenever that is, because I do not have a set schedule.